It's 4 in the morning, April 7th, 1868. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald has just returned home to his wife Agnes. He's drenched in blood and white as a ghost. McGee is murdered, he tells her. It's true. Thomas D'Arcy McGee had just been assassinated. He was one of the most respected politicians in the country, a brilliant speaker who fought tirelessly for Canadian unity, the prophet of Confederation, and Macdonald's right-hand man. And he had just been killed in the country's first political assassination. Macdonald was devastated.
An hour earlier, he'd been cradling the head of his dear dead friend. He was still in shock. There was no time to rest. There was a killer on the loose in Ottawa. Over the course of the next 8 days, a new nation would mourn the death of an icon. A manhunt would lead to one of Canada's strangest trials, and a mystery would be born, one that has never been solved.
This is Canadiana. McGee was born and raised in Ireland, a survivor of the Great Potato Famine, which killed 1 million people. It was there that he first entered political life as a revolutionary freedom fighter for Irish independence. He fought the British every chance he got. But in the end, he, like 1 million other Irish men, women, and children, was forced to flee his homeland, leaving the political turmoil and mass starvation behind in favor of a new life in North America. He came to Canada, where everything suddenly changed.
McGee fell in love with his new home. He was transformed from a vengeful rebel into a diplomatic nation builder, rallying support for the idea of a new Canadian nation. Less than a year before he was murdered, his labors were finally rewarded. In 1867, a land of divided colonies came together to form the Dominion of Canada. Thomas D'Arcy McGee would go down in history as one of the fathers of Confederation. He was adored by people all across the new country. So who the hell would want him dead? To answer that question, we need to reopen one of the most notorious of all Canadian cold cases. It's the night of the murder, 2 a.m. In half an hour, McGee will be dead. But for now, he's delivering another one of his eloquent speeches, arguing passionately in favor of the country he helped to build.
And I, sir, speak here not as the representative of any race or of any province, but as thoroughly and emphatically a Canadian.
He's met with vigorous applause, but amid the cheers of approval, a few react with disdain. It's a group of Irishmen looking down on McGee from a corner of the House gallery. His political life in Canada has made him a few enemies among his fellow Irish immigrants, including a secretive group of revolutionaries known as the Fenians.
The Fenians were willing to kill in the name of a free Ireland. They were on a mission to terrorize Canada, thinking that a campaign of deadly attacks here would put pressure on the British government to give Ireland its independence. They even organized full-scale invasions. Armies of thousands of soldiers marched across the border from the United States. D'Arcy McGee was one of their greatest enemies. To him, they were terrorists, giving Irish Catholics a bad name, villains determined to ruin all the work he'd done to unify Canada. He became the government's mouthpiece in the battle to crush the movement. But as much as McGee hated the Fenians, they hated him even more. To them, Thomas D'Arcy McGee was a traitor to the homeland. And one of them may even have been sitting up there in the gallery that night, getting ready to do something about it. When Parliament finally wraps things up, McGee joins Sir John A. Macdonald to smoke cigars at the House bar. After the Prime Minister leaves, McGee enjoys some whiskey with another MP, Robert McFarlane. Before long, they call it a night. McGee puts on his brand new bright white top hat and joins McFarlane for the short walk home under the full moon. They head down Metcalfe until they reach Sparks Street.
McFarlane bids McGee a good night, and leaves him to hobble with his cane down the street toward Mrs. Trotter's boarding house where he's staying. He steps into the shadowed side of the street, headed toward his death.
At the boarding house, Mrs. Trotter hears what she thinks is tapping on the window. She slowly creaks open the front door to find McGee has his key in the lock, half turned. A bright white flash. A gun goes off. The .32 caliber bullet passes through the back of McGee's head, knocks out his fake front teeth, and lodges in the door. His lifeless body falls backward into the street. His cigar, still lit, falls to his side. Somewhere nearby, a carriage races away.
A messenger is dispatched to wake the Prime Minister with the news.
McGee is murdered! Lying in the street! Shot through the head!
After that, things happen fast. Every Irish Catholic in the city is a suspect. Habeas corpus is suspended, and about 40 people are arrested, without any chance of bail.
They arrest the Prime Minister's own carriage driver, Patrick Buckley, and it's through him that they finally get a lead.
I hope it wasn't the sandy-whiskered tailor who killed him.
Sir John A's spies and secret police rush to search the city for tailors. The lead detective heads to Starr's Hotel and Tavern, where a man with sandy whiskers is staying. A man named Patrick James Whelan. They gather evidence from him and his room, mostly trinkets, odds and ends, and some Irish paraphernalia, as well as ammunition cartridges, and a fully loaded Smith & Wesson revolver, .32 caliber. None of it is damning until the detective finds powder residue on the gun barrel. He claims it must have been fired in the past 48 hours. And that's it. From here on out, Whelan is considered to be a dead man walking.
The suspect is brought here to Carleton County Jail, which is now a hostel. Today, you can sleep in one of the world's most dreadful prisons, in a cell no more than a meter wide. It was here that Whelan was allegedly overheard confessing to his cellmate.
Yes, I'm a great fellow. I shot that fellow. I shot him like a dog.
When the guards recounted that story in the courtroom, it caused a sensation. During the trial, one witness after another came forward to level claims of Fenianism against Whelan and to recount the threats they'd heard him utter. One of them said he'd seen Whelan there in the House of Commons on the night of the murder, sitting in the gallery along with his fellow Irishman.
But the strongest testimony came from the Crown's star witness, this man, Jean-Baptiste Lacroix. Lacroix told the court that on the night of the murder, he saw Whelan walking behind McGee on Sparks Street. "That's the man I saw," he shouted. "That's the man shot D'Arcy McGee." The circumstantial evidence was piling up, overwhelming the lead defense attorney, leaving Whelan with just one hope: another member of his legal team, John O'Farrell. O'Farrell was a notorious lawyer from Quebec with Fenian ties. Rumours suggest he may have tried to bribe the Crown's witnesses, maybe even threatened them. But whatever tricks O'Farrell pulled, the accused wasn't getting out of this one.
The quick trial came to a quick end. The jury barely took any time to deliberate. Whelan was sentenced to death. On February 11th, 1869, he was taken here to the gallows to be hanged in front of 5,000 spectators. It was one of the last public hangings in Canada. His last words were,
God save Ireland, and God save my soul.
but that came after he said this.
I know the man who shot Mr. McGee.
Here's where things get really strange. For one thing, Sir John A. Macdonald had an uncomfortable, if not downright illegal, influence on this case. He demanded to sit beside the judge for the entirety of the trial, glaring down at the accused, destroying the barrier between the executive and the judiciary. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. When you start to dig deeper, you see holes in everything. The motive. It had been immediately assumed that Whelan was a Fenian, but some people who knew him said he wasn't interested in politics at all. Whelan himself claimed that he was a fan of McGee. More importantly, he professed his innocence until his final breath, even writing a letter to the Prime Minister the day before his execution. All of this at a time when Fenians were known to welcome the chance for martyrdom. The witnesses. Lacroix said he saw Whelan stalking McGee on Spark Street, but his testimony was a mess. His descriptions of both men were completely inaccurate. He didn't even recognize Whelan when he first saw him. And he said McGee was wearing a black top hat. A good guess if you didn't know he'd been wearing his brand new white one. And most of the other witnesses who said they saw Whelan here and there, saying this or that, were just plain lying about their own whereabouts. And they didn't come forward until a reward of $10,000 was offered by the Prime Minister. The jury. Catholic citizens were banned from it. In an already corrupted trial, the prosecutor was somehow able to fill the jury with people who may have immediately despised an Irish Catholic like Whelan. Protestants. The gun. The most damning evidence was the smoking gun. But one of the strangest twists of the trial happened when a servant from Starr's Hotel came forward with a bombshell. Not only did she say that Whelan had been trying to sell the sport shooting pistol for weeks, but of course it had been fired recently. A maid who'd been cleaning Whelan's room pulled the gun out from under his pillow and accidentally shot herself in the arm. She still had the wound to prove it. But here's the kicker. There was another suspect. Whelan's brute of a lawyer, John O'Farrell. On the night of the murder, O'Farrell went to the house of an MP, James Goodwin, a friend of McGee's, and distracted him for hours in a pointless conversation, a man he'd never met before. He was allegedly stalling him from going to meet with McGee after Parliament wrapped up for the night. Then, right around the time of the murder, O'Farrell vanished. Back on Spark Street, neighbors told police they heard a carriage race off down the road after the gunshot went off. And not far away, guess who happened to show up at a closed toll gate, headed away from the scene of the crime? An attendant says the man gave his name as John O'Farrell. The newspapers knew about this. They called O'Farrell a murderer outright, enough times that he sued them. But none of it came to light until long after Whelan was swinging from a noose.
Theories abound. Some people think it was a conspiracy, that a whole group plotted McGee's murder, and that O'Farrell was absolutely a part of it. Whelan didn't shoot McGee, but maybe, as he said on the gallows, he knew who did. The truth? We'll never know, and we can thank Sir John A. Macdonald for that. Whelan tried to appeal his death sentence twice, but Macdonald wasn't about to show him any mercy. The judge who presided over the initial trial just happened to be promoted. He ended up presiding over Whelan's appeal, too, and he wasn't about to go against his own verdict. So then, Whelan appeals to an entirely different court, and when he shows up, guess who's sitting behind the bench? The same judge. Again. Whelan was doomed. Macdonald didn't stop there, not even after Whelan was hanged. The Prime Minister had originally promised the family they'd get to give the body a proper Catholic burial, but instead he made sure it was dumped in the ground here at the jail, and he sealed the grave with lime.
The funeral of Thomas D'Arcy McGee would be Canada's first ever state funeral. Nearly the entire city of Montreal attended it. And justly or not, as far as Sir John A. Macdonald was concerned, he'd avenged his friend's murder and brought closure to a national tragedy. The descendants of Patrick James Whelan eventually dug up a bit of earth at the Carleton County Jail in 2002 and buried it at Notre-Dame-des-Neiges Cemetery in Montreal, not far from McGee's final resting place. The last little bit of morbid irony.
And so ends the tragic tale of Thomas D'Arcy McGee and Patrick James Whelan. One man idolized and mourned, the other shamed and left to rot. Two Irishmen haunted by shadows of their homeland, bound together by a mystery no one can solve. A brutal killing, followed by a clear miscarriage of justice. All we can do now is drink to them both in traditional Irish fashion. Sláinte.
There's one more strange piece of evidence that we haven't mentioned yet, a mysterious encounter that some think puts the final nail in Whelan's coffin. And it really is bizarre, so I'll tell you about it in a second. But first, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more incredible stories about the history of Canada, please click subscribe. And you can follow us on social media at This Is Canadiana. We have plenty more stories to tell. But this really is just a very big country, so we do need your help to do it. You can become a patron on Patreon, and just a little bit of money every month, even just $1, will help us keep telling stories like this one. Now, back to that mysterious piece of evidence. Just 3 months before the assassination, on New Year's Eve, Whelan showed up at McGee's brother's house, where McGee was ringing in the new year. He demanded to see the politician, even though the two men had never met. And he told McGee there was a plot against his life, that someone was going to set fire to the house later that same night at 4 in the morning. McGee demanded to know who Whelan was and where he'd gotten his information. But Whelan refused to give up his sources, and he gave a fake name, Smith of the Grand Trunk. McGee asked him to alert the police, and Whelan said he would, but then the cops didn't show up until 5:30 in the morning, long after the attack was supposed to have taken place. It never did, but the story was brought up during the trial as evidence of a grand conspiracy, though no one could make much sense of it, and that's still true today. It's just one more bizarre detail in the strange story of the assassination of D'Arcy McGee, a tale that's been baffling historians for more than a century. Thanks again for watching. I'm Adam Bunch, and we'll see you next time on Canadiana.